And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love. And you have given him a son to sit upon his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people, whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this, your great people."
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And this is the Fig Tree Podcast. So today we're doing Kings and Chronicles. But before we begin, why don't we check in? Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, cool day here in Poway, California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the heat really hasn't kicked in quite yet. We know it's coming, but it's not. It's interesting. We have cool summers in the beginning, although it isn't really summer yet here. It's still May, but it feels like summer all the time out here in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Except I feel like I'm at the beach the last 4 days.
Yeah.
I grew up at the beach, and it's always May gray and June gloom. And,
Oh, yeah.
But this is
I
not,
know.
for 4 days, hasn't been burning off, and it's
Yeah.
below 70. It's crazy for here.
It's been kind of cool because, I live in Oceanside, so I always have to ignore the weather outside because if I'm going to work, I know it's going to be hotter than it is in Oceanside.
Because you're inland, that's right.
Mm-hmm. But for the past few days, it's been the same. So it's been kind of fun. So, yeah, doing well. Mother Nina, how you doing?
I'm doing great. We're preparing a group of parishioners for the bishop's visit. Many of them are newcomers, and I just love hearing their stories and their love for God and their love for the church, and it just makes me walking on sunshine.
So today we're doing not just one, but 4 books in one episode.
Yes, today we are doing 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Technically, however, they are 2 books. Like Samuel, both pairs that are one continuous narrative that got separated because of scroll length.
Mm-hmm. In the past, we mentioned Leviticus as a point in the Bible where people tend to fall off the wagon with their Bible reading plan. Well, if you did survive through the law, this is the other part where people tend to fall off the wagon again.
I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with it because I'm reading along and suddenly I feel like I've already read this.
Yeah.
I already know this. I'm going in circles here, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
And I know a lot about falling off the wagon.
So we chose to do all these books together for 2 reasons. The first is that we would do them for a whole month of episodes if we didn't clump them together like this. But the second reason is that Chronicles and Kings contain a lot of the same stories.
Right, and like you said, this can be a reason that they're so hard to get through because they're both really long, and then you get to Chronicles and it feels like you're just starting all the way over.
But there's differences we'll talk about later. But if that's where you are in your Bible reading plan and you feel like you are struggling to get through it, it is perfectly okay to skip Chronicles and come back to it later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So to start, why don't we follow the story of the Book of Kings, and we'll revisit Chronicles later and kind of mention some of the differences.
Sounds good. So the Book of Kings starts where Samuel left off at the end of King David's life. As David is getting older, the question of who his successor will be begins to arise. After some confusion about a guy who really wanted to be king, Adonijah Bathsheba comes to David and asks him to uphold a promise he had made to her, that their son Solomon would be king. And David agrees.
Mm-hmm. One really interesting thing about this is that Bathsheba is permanently included in the royal line. This woman whose life had been so turned upside down by David's actions now gets included in the royal line, and you even eventually will find that she's included, admittedly not by name, but she's referenced in the genealogy in the book of Matthew. And so even though all of this really awful stuff happened to her at David's hand, she ends up being a part of this bigger story. And I guess in that way, her story kind of gets redeemed.
So things get off to mostly a good start. Solomon, after conflict with Adonijah, has mercy on him, for now at least. And then when David dies, he gives his charge to Solomon.
When David's time to die drew near, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong, be courageous, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do, and whenever you turn, then the Lord will establish his word that he spoke concerning me. If your heirs take heed to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness, with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel.
So there's this really excellent charge, and we see David, who at his best was a good and beloved king, charging his son to now carry on his legacy and to also be a good king. So there's this wonderful story part of it. But then David starts instructing Solomon of all these people that he should kill.
That doesn't sound very king-like.
No, it isn't. So for a whole chapter, we read about Solomon consolidating his reign and killing all the enemies who threatened his reign. The book doesn't really treat this positively or negatively, but just treats it as part of the history.
Yeah, I think it kind of just treats it as this is part of what kingship is. Maybe part of the part that's not so great about kingship. But yeah, it's not a very good part of the story.
Well, and so I like the part where David tells Solomon to obey the commandments and ordinances and all of those things and walk in the ways of God. But I don't like the way where he says you do this so that you may prosper.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, and that your heirs will have everything that they want. And,
right.
You know, that's not why I follow Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not why I follow the commandments and do the things I'm supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps one of the points of confusion that we can see as a theme in the rest of the book of Kings too is, what does it mean by prosper? Like, what does it mean to prosper? What is good?
But then there's a much more positive story to begin Solomon's reign. Solomon is praying and offering incense, and God meets him in a dream. God says to him, "Ask what I should give you."
How do you think you would answer this?
Snakes?
No thanks. This reminds me of Jesus asking in the Gospels of so many people, "What do you want?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what do we want, right? I would love to say that I would answer the same as Solomon, but I'm not sure I would, you know. So, Mike, why don't you tell us what Solomon said?
And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love. You have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in the place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous that they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people? God said to him, because you have asked this, and you have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life.
It kind of goes back to that point, right, of what does it mean to prosper? What should we actually want in life?
Exactly. Is it possessions and power and prestige?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge that you are a blessing for your people?
Mm-hmm. Well, and Solomon gets all of it. Although it kind of seems to me like the parts that he didn't ask for here actually end up being his downfall. He ends up getting too focused on these other things, not the wisdom part, but all the riches and the honor and the long life and all of that, and the wives and I think that's instructive for us, right? Is for us to try to grow in the places that we've been best in our lives and not focus on other things. So this story really portrays Solomon at his best.
There's this awesome story about Solomon's wisdom that I've always loved. It sounds a little gruesome, but I mean, it's so illustrative, right? So two women come to Solomon claiming that they are both the mother of a baby who is present, right? And Solomon can't decide which one is telling the truth. So he says, let's just cut the baby in half and give each of you your half, and then you will be happy. And of course, one woman jumps forward and says, no, that's fine. Let her have the baby. And so that's how he knows that she's the real mother.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great story. So as the story of Solomon goes along, things seem to be just going great. It says that later on, under Solomon's reign,
Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. God gave Solomon very great wisdom, discernment, and breadth of understanding, as vast as the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all people of the East, and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else. His fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He would speak of trees, from cedar that is in the Lebanon to hyssop that grows in the wall. He would speak of animals and birds and reptiles and fish. People came from all the nations to hear the wisdom of Solomon. They came from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom.
And just as God had promised to David, the temple gets built under Solomon. So Solomon's kingdom is prosperous and flourishing. But then it all comes crashing down. Solomon, over his reign, has taken hundreds of wives and concubines, and many of them worshipped other gods. In the story, we can see him acting less like his father and more like the kings of other nations. Eventually, Solomon falls into idolatry, and God is angry with him.
This is like a tale as old as time, right? Like things are going well, you're like on top of the world, and then you get too comfortable, you get complacent, you start doing things that maybe you shouldn't be doing, and eventually
You hit bottom.
Yep.
abuse of power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hit
Yeah.
bottom.
It's
I'm playing God.
Yeah.
I'm not dependent upon God.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's instructive for us to never get complacent, right? Never take things for granted because
that sine wave that we see so many of these people writing is pretty dizzying, right? Better to stay centered in the Lord.
Right. So in the Book of Kings, we return to that theme we've talked about before, the spiral. After Solomon dies, the kingdom passes to his son Rehoboam, and Rehoboam is a wicked man. Under his reign, the kingdom splits in two, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah.
And as the book continues, it tells about 20 kings in each kingdom. In the northern kingdom, there are no good kings. And in the southern kingdom, there are only a few. And the rest are not good. Over and over again, the kings lead their people into idolatry and commit injustices against their own people. But as this happens, God raises up certain people who are meant to call out the problems and speak God's words and truth to the people. And these people are called
Prophets.
prophets.
Yes, the prophets. The prophets are like covenant lawyers. That's how some of my seminary professors describe them. They basically are prosecuting God's case against the kings and even people of Israel, saying, here are the terms of the covenant. Here's how you haven't followed them. Here's sometimes your punishment, or here's what's going to happen to you because you failed to obey the commandment. And so they're constantly pointing forward towards the exile, towards the things that will not go well because Israel has failed to obey.
I bet that makes them not very popular.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, they don't get a lot of love, which is true today too, right? Like we have prophets today, maybe not quite the same, but we have prophets. Can you think of any prophets in our own day?
So I think of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who of course was inspired by Gandhi.
Yeah.
And Mother Teresa.
Yeah, Mother Teresa. Yeah, and these people, like, they weren't totally loved during their lives. You know, we love them now, but especially like Martin Luther King Jr., he was maligned during his life and ended up getting killed because of the things he was saying. It's kind of how prophets... It's the life of a prophet, right?
It's not easy.
Yeah, but we need them, right? Because we need somebody to say, this is wrong. You know, this is how things should be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to stand up against the tide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But thanks be to God, these people have done that.
Yeah.
So 2 of the most important prophets in these books are Elijah and Elisha. Elijah is raised up to speak against King Ahab, who was so wicked that it says, Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. He and his wife Jezebel commit rampant idolatry, and Ahab is unjust. Elijah's ministry is full of miracles and demonstrations of God's power. He raises a boy from the dead, and when challenged by the priests of Baal, shows God's power over Baal, when their prayers to Baal cannot consume an offered bull, but prayers to God, even after dousing the bull in water, cause it to catch on fire and be completely consumed. Over and over, Elijah pronounces God's judgment against King Ahab, against his idolatry, and against his injustice, and that judgment comes true.
And then the story of Elijah ends as Elijah, instead of dying, is taken up into heaven. This is like a really cool story, and in the Bible, this only happens 3 times. The first is a guy named Enoch, who is just mentioned in passing. It's one of the most perplexing verses in the whole Bible. Then you've got Elijah, and then the last one, of course, is Jesus.
Well, it's not in the Bible, but Catholics, of course, believe that Mary is also one who was taken up into heaven. Mm-hmm. It's celebrated on August 15th, her Assumption Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's when we have our feast day of St. Mary the Virgin. and the Orthodox actually have the feast day of the Dormition, which is basically the same thing, but they believe she died first and then was assumed. She was resurrected and then assumed. So Elijah gets taken up into heaven, and then Elisha, Elijah's disciple, follows in his footsteps. And it says that he performs even more miracles than Elijah did. In fact, he actually performs exactly double recorded miracles in the book of Kings. And he continues Elijah's prophetic ministry against these kind of wicked rulers in Israel.
But then we hit more than rock bottom.
Yes. So the spiral just keeps going and going and going. And so there's all these wicked kings in the north. And then what happens?
They're overrun by the Assyrians. The
mm-hmm.
northern kingdom
Yes.
is overrun.
So they go into exile. And it's seen as God's kind of judgment on them for what they've been doing, which we should say, by the way, that the judgment is not just about them worshiping other gods. It's certainly part of it, but it's also about how they don't take care of the poor and how they're unjust to foreigners and how they don't take care of their own people. And so, those are lessons we could carry with us even today.
And they don't listen to Elisha.
Right. And I would say we ought to, if we're going to be prophets today, right? If we're going to stand up for what's right or what God wants, we should remember that these are things that God does not like and, in fact, stands against in the Bible. Well, you have the exile of the north, but it's not just the north.
And the invaders, keep attempting to attack the southern kingdom, but they're not successful
until Babylon
came in 583, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took the people into exile in Babylon.
Yeah. Babylon's an interesting one because it's kind of an archetypal, you see Babylon all through the story. Do you remember the first mention of Babylon in the Bible? It's a big, big tower.
The Tower of
Babel.
Babel.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Babel is just Babylon, right? Yeah. And so the Tower of Babel represents man's hubris, right? And this idea that we can just do everything without God. And what represents that more than this just big, bad, evil empire who thinks that they're able to take whatever they want and do whatever they want? So...
Well, my question is, if the temple was destroyed, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Where is it? It's one of the great mysteries of the world.
Right. Maybe you, dear listener, could be the one to find it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I was told that it is in Ethiopia.
Oh.
That it is actually at St. Mary's Church in Aksum.
Okay.
But the only problem with that story is that church as well was destroyed when the Muslim people came through and has been rebuilt. So
interesting. If
it was there, did it remain through that destruction of that church?
No.
Was it moved and then put back? But they say they have it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Babylon comes in, cleans house, but you have two particularly good kings towards the end of the book of Kings. Do you know who they are?
Hezekiah and Josiah.
Yes, those are the two really good kings towards the end of the book. And so there's hope, right? There's, even though the exile was going to happen and there was basically no stopping it at that point. Josiah, he brought in all these reforms, right? He brought back religion. Do you know which book of the Bible he discovers?
Deuteronomy?
He discovers a scroll of the book of Deuteronomy and brings it back into the use of the people of Israel. And so he's revered as this great king, and he points forward to Jesus, right? Because there's always this recurring hope when all of these things are going wrong that someday There will be a king who's truly just and who's truly fulfilling all of the things that the kings are supposed to be.
So what about Chronicles?
Yes. So it's one of the tricky things about the Bible, right, is that there's all of these repeated stories. But there are differences between Kings and Chronicles. And Chronicles is maybe a hidden gem, as it were. I think it's actually best if you do read it after you read the rest of the Old Testament. Because did you know that it's in a different place in the Jewish Bible than it is in the Christian Bible?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's at the very end.
Wow.
Yeah. So in our Bible, it's like we read the Book of Kings and then it's like deja vu and we're reading it again and it's really boring. But if you're reading the Jewish Bible, you've read all the stories and you get all the way to the end and there's no Messiah yet, right? And the story hasn't come to its fruition yet. So the Book of Chronicles is like this overview of what's happened so far. It actually literally begins with Adam. And it's like this overview of the story so far and this pointing forward to say, there's still hope. Like, this is going somewhere, man. And someday the Messiah is going to come. And so you'll notice some of the differences between the two books. David, you remember all those not so great stories that we read in the book of Samuel? Those aren't in Chronicles. It's only positive stories. And this is mostly true of the rest as well. I mean, there's some negative stories about bad kings, but there's this overwhelmingly positive bent to it. It's like a kind of glossy history of Israel, which I think is very interesting. And the whole point is that it's pointing forward to say, look, the Messiah is coming. This is all going somewhere. God has a plan. God has not abandoned us.
Whereas in the Old Testament, we end with the prophets that are all pointing towards Jesus.
That's right.
So it's a seamless transition
Right.
from the old into the new.
That's right.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. So that's Kings and Chronicles. I hope you don't get too bored while you're reading it, but there's some really good stories in there.
Well, I love how you framed about how in the Jewish Bible it's put at the end as a message of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think when I reread it, I'm going to save it for the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Hope.
See you next time. Thanks for listening to the Fig Tree Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this podcast on social media so others can join us. We hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Fig Tree Podcast.